Okay, so what happens when a truly brilliant mind, a person who could solve philosophical puzzles that stump some of the greatest thinkers of his time, also embraces one of history's most evil ideologies? Well, that is the incredible and incredibly difficult story of Ernst Mali, a philosopher of impossible contradictions.
This is the core conflict of Ernst Mali's entire legacy. You've got this pioneering logician on one side and on the other, a card-carrying Nazi party member. To even begin to wrap our heads around this, we first have to really appreciate his genius. And that whole story starts with a very famous and very tricky puzzle.
So to really get Mali's brilliance, we have to go back to a problem that was a huge headache for his teacher, the famous Alexius Meinong. And the question is this: if we can talk about impossible things, like a round square, don't they have to exist in some way for us to even talk about them? This simple-sounding idea opened up a massive can of logical worms.
The great philosopher Bertrand Russell, he heard this and thought it was completely absurd. He argued that, look, if a round square has some kind of being, it has to be both round and, well, not round, because squares aren't round. For a logician, that's a flat-out contradiction. As Russell famously put it, this is intolerable. So how did Mali get out of this jam? He came up with this really groundbreaking idea. He said, okay, a property can relate to an object in one of two ways. First, there's determination. You can think of this like the object's blueprint, its core definition. And then there's satisfaction, which is whether a real object out there in the world actually has that property.
And here is where his solution just snaps perfectly into place. The idea of a round square is absolutely determined by the properties roundness and squareness. That's its blueprint. But the concept itself, the thought in your head, doesn't actually satisfy those properties. It doesn't have a physical shape. So the contradiction, it just disappears. It's a really subtle move, but logically, it's incredibly powerful.
And Mali wasn't just a one-trick pony who only dealt with impossible objects. He was also the very first person to try and create a formal system for the logic of obligation, basically trying to bring mathematical rigor to ethics.
He called this deontic logic, which is really just a fancy name for the logic of ought. He wanted to build a system that could handle statements like, you are obligated to do X, or you are forbidden from doing Y, and then analyze them with the kind of precision you'd see in math.
But for all its ambition, this pioneering work had a fatal flaw. His system accidentally erased the very distinction it was trying to explore, that critical line between what ought to be and what actually is.
So in Mali's system, it logically worked out that something is required if and only if it's already true. This leads to the pretty bizarre conclusion that whatever is what ought to be, which kind of defeats the entire purpose of having ethics or obligations in the first place. It was a huge failure, but you have to remember it was the very first attempt in a field that is still thriving today.
Okay, so we have this picture of a brilliant, if sometimes flawed, logician who's obsessed with precision and formal rules. How in the world do we square that person with the other side of his life? How does a mind so dedicated to logic get tangled up in an ideology of pure, irrational destruction?
Well, this wasn't some sudden, latent life change of heart. When you look at the timeline of Mali's political life, it's unambiguous. His support for anti-Semitic and German nationalist movements started way back when he was a student in the 1890s, and it just continued steadily right up until he officially joined the Nazi Party in May of 1938.
And he wasn't exactly hiding it. In a document he wrote in 1938, he explicitly said that he saw his own philosophical work as a weapon, a way to fight what he called Jewish positivist ideas, and, in his own truly chilling words, replace them by something healthier. He then actually twisted his own philosophical logic to justify Nazi ideology. He argued that the German people, the folk, was like a quasi-person, an entity that was way more important than any single individual. He claimed this German folk had to be kept pure, echoing the Nazis' absolutely horrific rhetoric about racial hygiene and superiority. So this leaves us with a deeply uncomfortable job. How are we supposed to look at his body of work? Can we separate the brilliant logician from the Nazi ideologue? Or should we even try? So how do we even begin to approach his work?
Well, one really useful way to think about it is to sort his writings into different categories. You have grade 1. This is his work that seems to be purely philosophical, free of ideology. Then, grade 2. This is work that, while philosophical, could be twisted to support Nazi ideas. And then you have grade 3, which is, to put it bluntly, just pure propaganda. This kind of system at least lets us engage with his genuine contributions to logic while also clearly identifying and condemning the rest.
In the end, Ernst Mali's legacy is just a stark, painful reminder of a problem that never goes away. He forces us to look right at that uncomfortable relationship between an idea and the person who created it, between intellectual brilliance and just profound moral failure. It's a contradiction that's almost as hard to resolve as a round square, and it leaves us with a question that really has no easy answer. How should we value the work of minds that also embraced the truly abhorrent?